In the grand, silent calculus of the cosmos, my people, the Lumen, believed we had solved the final equation. We called it emotion. For millennia, we had observed it across the star lanes, a chaotic variable, a vestigial flaw that led lesser species to glorious bursts of creation and spectacular, inevitable ruin. We had evolved beyond it. We traded passion for precision, individuality for a collective consciousness guided by pure, cold logic. We were enlightened. We were the future. And we were profoundly, catastrophically wrong. I remember this truth crystallizing not in a blaze of star fire or the fury of a battle, but in the unnerving stillness of a human gaze. I am Kale, and I was an acolyte to Arbiter Vorlog on the day humanity was brought before the Covenant for appraisal. I stood within the crystalline heart of the conclave of First Light, its countless facets refracting the light of 1,000 suns, a monument to the elegant certainty of reason. And into this perfect equation walked the variable, two of them. They called themselves Eris and Ilara Thorn. They did not carry weapons, they did not wear armor. They walked with a strange, fluid grace that seemed at odds with the rigid geometry of the conclave. Arbiter Vorlog, his luminous form a pillar of calm authority, regarded them from his elevated dais. His voice, when it came, was not sound, but a resonated thought projected into all our minds, devoid of inflection. You are humanity, the species born of chaos, yet you stand before us claiming the mantle of peace. Explain this contradiction. The male, Eris Thorn, met the Arbiter's gaze. I had reviewed the human's file, xenolinguist, cultural specialist. His biological readings were a storm of neurochemical activity, yet his posture was of absolute tranquility. It was the calm of a deep ocean, not an empty vessel. There is no contradiction, Arbiter, Eris said, his voice actual sound, a soft vibration in the silent chamber that felt both archaic and strangely intimate. Peace is not the absence of chaos, it is the mastery of it. Vorlog's light flickered, a subtle sign of dismissal. Mastery is control, and control is achieved by eliminating flawed variables. Your species still clings to the most flawed variable of all, the individual emotional bond. We have studied your histories. These bonds are the catalyst for your greatest acts of violence. Beside Eris, the female, Ilara, shifted her weight. Her bioreadings were even more volatile, a bright flame of nervous energy and curiosity. She was a biointerface engineer, they had said, a genius in her own right. She offered a small, hesitant smile toward Vorlog, a gesture so alien in this place of logical purity that it felt like a shout. Our bonds are also the catalyst for our greatest acts of love and sacrifice, she countered, her voice brighter than her brother's. You cannot have one without the other. I watched the Arbiter process this. To us, love was a biochemical illusion, sacrifice, an illogical waste of resources. I saw in my mentor's mind a flicker of something akin to pity. He saw them as children clinging to a dangerous fairy tale. We shall see, Vorlog's thought echoed, turning his attention to Eris. Your history is a testament to your capacity for destruction. Yet you dismantled your arsenals. You preach cooperation. The Covenant requires understanding. What prevents your species from reverting to its base nature when faced with a threat it cannot talk its way out of? For the first time, I saw Eris Thorn smile. It was not a broad gesture, just a faint upturn at the corners of his lips, but it was the most unnerving thing I had ever witnessed. It was a smile that held secrets. You mistake our choice for peace as a lack of capacity for other solutions, he said softly. We choose peace because we know, more intimately than any species you have ever met, the true cost of the alternative. We don't fear war, Arbiter. We fear what we become when we are forced to fight it. There was a chilling finality in his tone. It was not a threat. It felt like a confession, a warning. The air in the conclave grew heavy, the light from the crystals seeming to dim ever so slightly. Vorlog was silent for a long moment, the collective mind of the lumen processing this new, unsettling data. Then his light stabilized, colder than before. Words are elegant, but they are ephemeral. The covenant requires proof, not philosophy. Your sister, the engineer, she will interface with the core knowledge of the conclave. We will observe the integrity of your species' neuropsychology under communion. It was a simple request, a standard procedure, but as I watched Eris's secret smile finally fade, replaced by an expression of serene, absolute focus, I felt the first cold whisper of doubt. We were the enlightened ones, the masters of logic, but in that moment, I realized we were about to test an equation we did not truly understand, and we had chosen to use the one variable that human history, in all its bloody pages, had warned us never, ever to touch.
Ilara Thorne stepped forward, her expression a mixture of apprehension and fierce determination. Before her, the central dais hummed, and a pillar of pure, soft light descended, pulsing with the stored knowledge of 10,000 species. The core knowledge. It was not a machine to be operated, but a current to be joined. My people, the lumen, interfaced with it seamlessly, our logical minds merging with the data stream like rivers flowing into a calm sea. When Ilara placed her hands into the light, the chamber filled with a discordant symphony. It was not the clean, silent transfer of data I was accustomed to. It was a chaotic rush of information intertwined with sensory echoes, flashes of memory, and waves of raw emotion. To the collective lumen consciousness, it was inefficient, messy, a signal filled with static. I saw Arbiter Vorleg's light dim fractionally in distaste. But the human female held her ground, her eyes closed in concentration, her mind wrestling with the torrent. With Ilara now occupied, vulnerable, Vorlog turned his full, undivided attention to her brother. The real test had begun. The air grew dense as the Arbiter shifted the focus of the chamber's energy. He did not speak, but he conjured images within the crystalline walls, echoes pulled from humanity's own archives. A city of fire and ash under a mushroom cloud. Trenches carved into a world filled with the ghosts of young men. Starving children staring out with hollow eyes. Ships sinking into a cold black ocean. It was a curated museum of human failure. A silent, damning prosecution. This is your species, Eris Thorne, Vorlog's thought projected, cold and sharp as splintered ice. This is the inevitable result of your cherished emotional bonds. Loyalty to a flag, devotion to a creed, love for a nation. Every great atrocity you have committed can be traced back to an emotion you elevated above reason. Your peace is not mastery. It is a temporary ceasefire in an endless internal war. How long until the next bond, the next love, demands the galaxy as its price? I expected the human to flinch, to show anger or shame. He did neither. He looked upon the ghosts of his own past with a profound, unshakable sorrow. His stillness was not an absence of feeling. It was a container for all of it. You are not wrong, Arbiter, Eris replied, his voice a low counterpoint to the silent screaming on the walls. You see the data points, the wars, the famines, the betrayals. You see the evidence of our failures. But you fail to see the lesson that was written in the blood of every one of them. He gestured to an image of a medic, unarmed, running across a battlefield to aid a fallen soldier. You see two primitives trying to kill each other. I see the birth of the idea that a life, any life, is worth saving even at the risk of one's own. That is not a logical conclusion. It is an emotional one. He then looked at a stark image of a world leader weeping publicly after a terrorist attack. You see a failure of leadership, a display of weakness. I see a shared grief that united a planet. Our capacity for empathy was forged in the fires you so coolly display. A species that has never known darkness cannot comprehend the value of light. A species that has never felt profound loss cannot understand the sanctity of life. Our peace is not a ceasefire, Arbiter. It is a fortress, built brick by painful brick from the rubble of our worst moments. We choose cooperation not because we have forgotten how to hate, but because we remember all too well where it leads. His words resonated in my mind, a logic of a different kind, one that bypassed our processors and struck at something far older. I could feel the other lumen reinforcing their mental shields, classifying his arguments as primitive sophistry, a clever justification for inherent flaws. It was the reaction we were conditioned to have. But I found I could not. I looked at Eris, standing calm amidst the phantoms of his species' agony, and I did not see a primitive. I saw a survivor, a teacher. I looked at his sister, Ilara, her face tight with strain as she communed with the core, her mind a beacon of chaotic, beautiful light. And I began to wonder if we had misidentified the variable. What if emotion wasn't the static? What if it was the signal itself, and our logic was simply not attuned to the right frequency? Vorlog, however, remained unmoved. He had not found the flaw he was looking for. Eris Thorn's reasoning was a closed loop, infuriatingly consistent. The human had turned every accusation of weakness into a declaration of a different kind of strength. And for an entity like Arbiter Vorlog, a challenge to his core logic could not be tolerated. The images of war faded and the chamber returned to its serene, crystalline calm. But the silence was now a weapon. Your words are compelling, human. A well-constructed narrative, but they are abstractions. The integrity of any system is only proven at its breaking point. Let us find yours.
The Arbiter's thought had barely faded when the symphony of Ilara's mind became a shriek. The pillar of light she was connected to flickered violently, its serene luminescence corrupting into a strobing, agonizing pulse. A sound tore through the conclave's perfect silence, a sound my kind had only ever experienced as archived data, a raw human scream of pure agony. It was a violation of the chamber's very essence, a wave of primal chaos that crashed against the shores of our logic. My mind recoiled. It was data, yes, but it was data that hurt. Aerith Thorn moved, not a full step, but a pivot. His entire body instantly reoriented towards his sister. The deep ocean of his calm was gone, replaced by a churning, violent storm barely contained beneath the surface. "Whatever you are doing," he said, and his voice was no longer soft, but a low, dangerous growl, laced with a tension that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Stop it. Now." Vorlag's presence remained utterly placid, a monolith of detached curiosity. He was not inflicting pain, he was observing a variable. The distinction was, to him, absolute. We are merely observing a flawed system under critical stress, his thought projected, clinical and precise. The pain is a diagnostic tool. Witness how the bond of affection frays when faced with self-preservation. Witness how the individual consciousness chooses itself over another. Ilara screamed again, a choked, desperate sound, and that is when I saw it, the breaking point. But it was not Ilara's, it was his. Everything in Eris Thorn that had been diplomatic, sorrowful, and patient simply vanished. It was not erased. It was burned away, leaving behind something older, harder, something forged in the heart of a dying star. The sorrow in his eyes was replaced by the cold, clear light of absolute purpose. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. He took one slow step forward, placing himself between Vorlog and his sister, and when he spoke, his voice was utterly flat, devoid of all emotion, and it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. Arbiter, you have 10 seconds to release her. The sheer audacity of the statement sent a ripple of confusion through the Lumen consciousness. A primitive, issuing a command? Vorlag's light pulsed with what I could only interpret as amusement. Threats? The final illogical resort of a failed argument. You prove our thesis, human. Ilara cried out again, a sound that was half scream, half sob. That was the last sound she made before he began to move. 10, Eris said, his voice a whisper that carried more weight than a starship's engine. His eyes were not on Vorlag. They were scanning the chamber, the crystalline walls, the conduits of energy that fed the days. He was not looking for a weapon. He was reading the room's architecture. 9. Vorlog watched, impassive, a scientist observing a specimen's final futile struggles. 8. The human took 2 swift, silent steps, not towards us, but towards a large cylindrical crystal set into the wall, a harmonic resonator that regulated the chamber's power flow. The other lumen registered his movement as an act of desperation, a meaningless gesture. 7. 6. He was beside the resonator now. He did not strike it. He placed his palms flat against the humming surface. 5. A low hum began to build in the chamber, a frequency that set my own luminous form to vibrating uncomfortably. What is he doing? One of my fellow acolytes projected in a confused thought. This is irrational behavior. They were wrong. It was the most rational, terrifyingly focused act I had ever witnessed. 4. 3. Eris tore a maintenance panel from the base of the resonator with a single sharp pull, revealing a nexus of pulsing crystalline circuitry. He did not need a tool. His hands plunged into the light, his fingers finding specific junctions with unerring precision, as if he had studied the blueprints his entire life. He was not destroying it. He was rewriting its function. 2. I finally understood. He wasn't lashing out. He was performing surgery. 1. He breathed out. He twisted 2 of the core crystals into a new alignment, creating a direct, unregulated feedback loop. The result was instantaneous. A piercing, silent shriek of pure energy erupted from the resonator, a frequency beyond sound. The crystalline walls of the conclave groaned, and hairline fractures spread like lightning across their perfect surfaces. The pillar of light holding Ilara did not just deactivate, it shattered, exploding into a million harmless, glittering motes of fading light. Every lumen system in the chamber, including the neural link Vorlag was using to torment Ilara, was hit with a wave of energy so overwhelming that they were all instantly forced into a hard diagnostic reboot. The pain stopped. The test was over. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any that had come before. Emergency lights activated, bathing the fractured chamber in a cold blue glow. Eris was no longer by the wall. He was beside his sister, helping her to her feet, his body positioned to shield her from us. He gently pushed her hair from her face, his hands steady, his voice a soft murmur only she could hear. Then he looked up at us. He looked at Arbiter Vorlag, whose light was flickering in disorientation, and the expression on the human's face was one of ancient, absolute possession. It was not the face of a diplomat or a scholar. It was the look of an apex predator whose nest had been disturbed, a look that said, without a single word, that the rules of this engagement had just been fundamentally and permanently rewritten. And in that moment, my mind, our collective mind, for the first time in 10,000 years of flawless logic, felt a new, cold, and entirely unfamiliar variable. We felt fear.
The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the fractured crystalline chamber. The air, once humming with controlled energy, was now filled with the faint, discordant chime of dying systems and the sharp scent of ozone. My fellow Lumen were in a state of collective shock, our shared consciousness a turbulent sea of disbelief and confusion. The perfect, logical machine of the conclave had been broken, not by a fleet or a superweapon, but by the will of a single, determined primitive. Arbiter Vorlog's luminous form flickered weakly, his authority shattered as completely as the energy conduit beside him. "This is an act of unprovoked aggression," he projected, but the thought was faint, frayed at the edges, lacking all its former conviction. An attack on the Covenant itself, an act of... Eris Thorn cut him off, not by raising his voice, but by speaking into the ringing silence with a chilling finality. "No," he said, his gaze fixed on Vorlog, unwavering and absolute. This was not an act of aggression. This was an act of preservation, and it was provoked. You have fundamentally, catastrophically misunderstood the nature of your test subject. He stood beside his sister, who was now leaning against him, her breathing still ragged but steady. The fury of a moment ago was gone, replaced with a calm that was far more terrifying than any rage. It was the calm of a verdict already decided. You looked at us, at our history, at our biology, and you searched for a flaw. You found our emotional bonds, our love for our kin, and you labeled it a weakness, a chaotic variable to be tested, to be broken. You were looking at it from the wrong end of the telescope, Arbiter. That bond is not our weakest link. It is our final failsafe, our oldest and most effective weapon. I accessed our archives on his species' homeworld, the name itself a chilling designation. Earth. Class 12, Deathworld. A classification our analysts had always considered a poetic exaggeration. I was beginning to understand it was a clinical understatement. Eris must have sensed my search, for his eyes briefly met mine across the room. We were not born in the gentle, logical cradle of a gas giant's moon, Arbiter. We were forged on a crucible of a planet, a world of tooth and claw, where everything from the microbes in the water to the ice that crushed continents was actively trying to kill us every single day. We did not survive by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by being the most stubborn, the most adaptable, and the most fiercely protective pack hunters on the planet. He took a step forward, leaving his sister's side, and the sheer intensity of his presence made my own logical mind feel slow, primitive. Logic does not save you when a saber-toothed cat is charging your cave. An individual does not survive a global winter. But a pack, a family, a tribe that holds together, they might. And so, over millions of years of relentless, brutal evolution, we developed a primary protocol, a directive that sits deeper than reason, deeper than fear for our own lives. It is the absolute, non-negotiable defense of the pack, of our kin. The first human mother who picked up a sharpened stone to face down a predator 3 times her size for her child did not perform a cost-benefit analysis. The first soldier to shield his brother-in-arms from an explosion with his own body did not calculate the statistical odds of survival. They were acting on that protocol, a protocol written in the language of blood and fire long before we ever wrote words or dreamed of the stars. And that, Arbiter, is the protocol you just triggered. He stopped directly before Vorlog's dais, looking up at the flickering, diminished light of my mentor. You did not inflict a diagnostic pain upon my sister to test her breaking point. You threatened the integrity of my pack. And in doing so, you activated a survival program that has kept my species alive against impossible odds for 2 million years.
It has one directive: neutralize the threat by any means necessary. The silence that followed his words was absolute. I finally understood. I saw it all with a terrifying new clarity. Their peace was not a philosophy they had adopted. It was a cage they had built for themselves out of willpower and bitter memory to contain the very thing that had ensured their survival. Their restraint was not weakness. It was a conscious, daily act of reining in a monster. And we, in our arrogant, logical purity, had just reached through the bars and slapped that monster in the face. Eris turned his back on Vorlog, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and walked back to his sister. "Consider yourselves fortunate," he said, without looking back. "What you just witnessed was not an attack. It was a warning. It was a controlled, measured response. I strongly suggest you do not seek to witness an uncontrolled one." He placed a protective arm around his sister, and together, they stood in the ruins of our certainty. Two humans bound by a force more powerful than any law of physics we had ever discovered. And the fear I felt was no longer a confusing anomaly. It was a logical, fully formed conclusion. It was the dawning, horrifying understanding that we had not been testing a primitive species. We had been taunting a god of survival. And we were only alive because it had chosen, for now, to let us live.
Time itself seemed to hold its breath in the fractured blue-lit chamber. The humans did not press their advantage. They did not make demands or issue threats. The moment the immediate danger to his sister had passed, the ancient predator in Eristhorn's eyes receded, retreating back into the depths, and the scholar returned. He simply helped Alara to a low ledge, his movements gentle, his voice a quiet murmur of reassurance as he checked her for any lingering harm. This, I realized, was the final, most crucial piece of data. The Fury was not his default state. It was a shield, deployed only when necessary, and dismissed the second the threat was gone. The monster was already back in its cage, locked by a will stronger than any crystalline technology we possessed. In the collective lumen consciousness, the frantic waves of fear and confusion began to subside, replaced by something far more profound, a slow, dawning, and deeply humbling clarity. We had not merely seen a display of power, we had witnessed a different form of logic, a higher-order calculus that used love as its foundational axiom. Arbiter Vorlag's light, which had been a weak, erratic flicker, slowly stabilized. But it was not the same. The cold, piercing white of pure reason was gone, replaced by a softer, gentler luminescence, the color of a dawn I had only ever seen in astronomical charts of alien worlds. He lowered his head. It was a slow, deliberate inclination, a gesture not of defeat, but of profound, absolute respect. It was a gesture of concession not seen in our culture for 10,000 years, reserved only for the acknowledgement of a new fundamental truth of the universe, a paradigm shift that redefines all previous equations. The appraisal is concluded, Vorlag's thought projected, and the words were no longer a judgment, but a statement of fact. Humanity is understood. When the Thorns were escorted from the chamber, it was not as subjects, but as envoys of a power we were only beginning to comprehend. They walked through a corridor of lumen who now kept a respectful, reverent distance, our collective gaze filled with a newfound awe. I stood there long after they were gone, looking at the cracks in our perfect logical world. In my mind, I began to compose my final report to the Lumen homeworld, the one that would change the course of our history. It began not with an analysis of technology or military capacity, but with a correction of our most fundamental philosophical error.
For millennia, we have held that logic is the ultimate endpoint of evolution, and that emotion is the chaotic remnant of a primitive past. Today, we have learned that this is false. We have encountered a species that has not eliminated their chaotic past, but has instead harnessed it. Humanity does not represent a failure of evolution. They represent a terrifying, beautiful balance. I describe the events not as a test, but as a lesson in the nature of real strength. We came here to test a flaw. Instead, we found a law of the cosmos we never knew existed, that the most profound strength is forged in the deepest pain, and the most unshakable peace is the one chosen by those who have mastered the art of war. Their compassion is not an absence of lethality. It is lethality held in a state of perfect, deliberate restraint. My recommendation was simple, stark, and absolute. Humanity's peace is not a passive state. It is an active, ongoing choice. It is a gift they give to the galaxy every single day. We must treat this gift with the reverence it deserves. Do not test their boundaries, do not mistake their kindness for weakness, and never under any circumstances give them a reason to unmake that choice. For we have now seen what lies behind it, and the galaxy is not prepared for the alternative. I sent the report. Then I walked to the great viewport of the conclave, looking out at the endless sea of stars. My gaze drifted towards a faint, unremarkable yellow star in the distance. Sol, they called it. For my entire existence, we had searched the heavens for the ultimate intelligence, always looking for a greater, more perfect logic. I now knew we had been looking in the wrong place. We should have been looking for a greater heart. For it is there, in the chaotic, illogical, fiercely protective bonds of love, that the true gods of this universe hide their power. And humanity, in all its flawed and fragile glory, had just taught us how to pray.